Hey everybody, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Snable and I am going to be your webinar host today. We are talking about manual material handling, specifically about some training tips, so kind of ways to think outside the box. Not really going to spend a lot of time talking about assessments per se, really more focus on training and just kind of how you might do that for your specific industry. So I know that many of you are maybe joining us over your lunch break. We kind of thought we would try a new time this month and see if that worked out. We always try to pick a different time just because there's always some kind of a reason why, oh, I can't come at 9 o'clock because I'm in meetings, or I can't come at 3 o'clock at the end of the day. I'm pulled in too many different directions. So we always try to offer at different times. But as you guys know, we also, or many of you know if you come regularly, is that we do record our webinars. So this webinar will be recorded and we will ensure to have it posted up on our YouTube channel. So in the event that you have missed the beginning or a little bit of the end or it entirely, as long as you've registered for the webinar, you'll get that notification when the webinar is ready. You can watch at any time. So, how's everybody's day going? Yeah, I've had a bit of a crazy morning, so I'm excited. Let's sit down and settle here and I'll talk about this training. And I can see lots of you are all logged in now, and I'll give you a bit of a background information. Just I know some of you know PROergonomics, and maybe you don't. Maybe some of you are brand new to our webinars or aren't really sure, or maybe don't know us personally at all. But I figured I'd just give you that bit of a background information on PROergonomics. So we are a team of ergonomists. And we do consulting work and training. So as consultants, we go in and we do assessments, we write up reports with recommendations, we do job coaching, we do training. Training is a really big thing for, we kind of go in ebbs and flows in terms of projects that we're working on. But in particular right now, I think we're doing a lot of job coaching and training. Probably, I would say for the month of November seems to be one of the things that's keeping us the most busy right now. That's not to say that happens every November. It just, right now that seems to be what's on our plate. And so this webinar is super fitting because, we've been developing our training. We've been really out there practicing and tweaking it. And it really fits in perfectly with what we're doing right now. So in terms of our team, we are all registered kinesiologists in Ontario. So that kind of gives us our liability insurance. And then we are all, most of us are certified professional ergonomists or working towards that designation. And that's through either the Canadian board or the American board, which are equivalents. So when you work with PROergonomics, you're definitely getting that quality, that professional ergonomist approach. We have loads of experience, all different industries. Each one of us kind of specializes. Well, I'd say specializes, but just, over the years, we have each kind of developed our own little niche. I tend to work primarily with municipalities and healthcare. And it's not to say that I couldn't work in another industry. It's just that just is where kind of my background lies and sort of where my passion is. And it's where I tend to gravitate to, and then Alex is a lot more into manufacturing, and we just all kind of have our own little niches. But I mean, once you look at our entire team and kind of where we specialize and where our experience or passions lie, gosh, we've got some stories and we cover just about any industry, I think. So that's just a little bit of background information on our team. And then for today's webinar, so manual material handling, risky business or risky behavior. And I love this kind of catchy title, and I'll give you a little bit of just some info on kind of how this was created. Is that just coming up with this title really was, it's kind of about how we get called in to do an assessment, or the things that we see. So somebody gets hurt at work, for example, and you go and do an investigation to, you've got to address what happened. So somebody hurt their back, somebody hurt their knee, and you go in to figure out what happened, and then you make the recommendation to try to implement controls. Well, so many times we just see that the person wasn't lifting with good technique, and the corrective action is provide training. We see that surprisingly, we see that a lot. And so what it makes me think is, well, was it the person? Was it just their behavior? Was it just the technique that they chose that was the problem? Or was it something a little bit more systemic? Was it how that product is laid out, or where it's stored, or the process, or the lack of equipment? there's so many other factors that can go into it. And so it's just one of those things where we often see, and kind of with a chuckle, that one of the corrective actions, or the only corrective action, needs to provide training. So that's kind of where the background, I guess, in why we wanted to do a webinar on this topic, and really talk about, whether or not training is a proper solution, and if it is going to be a solution or part of a multifaceted solution, then how would you go about doing it to make sure that it is the most effective that it could be. So in terms of my outline for today, in terms of how I envision the flow going, is that I'll talk about manual material handling, just define it, make sure we're all on the same page, and really talk about kind of like the traditional manual material handling. We think of lifting and pulling and pushing, but there's like standard or non-standard. And again, I'll get into that on the next few slides, but really talking about, what is manual material handling, and trying to think of some examples of how it actually occurs, and then talking about how we might address that. So, you got you're lifting stacks of paper, you're lifting bags of flour, you're handling bags of salt because you've got to salt all the parking lots with all the snow that we're getting. There's lots of things that you lift or that you have to handle, and some of them are boxes, right? A box of paper has handholds, and some things do not, like a bag of salt. It can be kind of wiggly. So that's what kind of where I'm going with the standard versus non-standard. Talk a little bit about just what some of the legislation is saying, and kind of in terms of how we need to address these hazards. And then talk primarily, like the bulk of this session will be about training. So just some kind of tips on how you might deliver training and things to consider. So manual material handling it's really any type of exertion activity, I guess is what we could call it, but it's lifting, it's lowering it. So going up, going down, it's pushing or pulling, and it could be pushing or pulling a cart, but it also could be pushing or pulling a wrench, right? Or a valve, right? Any kind of push or pull. Could be carrying, so you lift something and then you carry it. It could include throwing or moving, right? So moving maybe is like wiggling it or maneuvering it. That, maybe you're calling it move as opposed to a push or a pull or a lift or a lower. Restraining, holding, or any other type of handling, basically. So it really is a force exertion in some shape. And when you look at WSIB statistics, I mean, this is not going to be news to many of you. I'm sure you're well aware, but year over year, we're seeing very similar trends, right? And then, like more than 40% of Ontario workplace injuries are strains and sprains. So those are those aches, the pains, the tendinitis, the low back, the general low back pain, all those strains and sprains, they're the number one injury. The number one event is overexertion. The number one part of the body affected, and again, these are similar trends year over year, is the low back. So 16% of all lost time claim injuries, these are stats from 2017, by the way. So 16% of all injuries, lost time claim injuries in 2017 were affected the lower back. So when I kind of look at this, from my ergonomic eye, is that I see like a lot of these injuries are preventable, right? So overexertion. If we had been working in maybe a less, like within our capabilities, if we had been working like using the right tools, if we had been provided the proper tools, right? Again, there's lots of different solutions or things that could have happened here, but really, if we could have done some of those things, how many injuries could we effectively have prevented, right? So it comes down to providing the right controls, the tools, the lift assist, implementing height adjustability or different heights of tables, carts, etc. Also, workers selecting the right tools. So if provided the options, are they selecting the right tool for the job, and then using them in the right manner, and then overall the techniques or the body postures. I really do feel like technique does matter. So just like at the gym or in any kind of a sport, technique does matter. But definitely what I kind of take from this is that ergonomics for sure applies. Like the goal of ergonomics is to prevent strains and sprains, to work smarter and not harder. So there's definitely some opportunities. I mean, that's kind of how, when I look at these sets, that's how I interpret them anyways. Great, so in terms of, what, from ergonomics and legislation, there's not always these hard and fast rules. So in Ontario, we have the Ontario Health and Safety Act, and there's the general duty clause, that we have to take every reasonable precaution in the circumstances to protect the worker. And then we also have those sector-specific regulations like industrial construction, healthcare, and specifically in there, like the Green Book, it doesn't really have anything specific about manual material handling, but I mean, if you looked up in the industrial establishments one, it does have reference specifically to material handling. So it talks about things that have to be lifted, carried, or moved, and that they should be moved in such a way that precautions and safeguards, including clothing guards or other precautions, will ensure that these things do not endanger the safety of any worker. So there is commentary to that. It also comments that these things shall be transported, placed, stored in such a way that it's not going to fall, basically that it's not going to endanger the safety of the worker, right? So there's that one section as well that talks about manual material handling. And then there's the Canada Occupational Health and Safety Regulations, and this is where you get the most specific information about manual material handling. So like basically what I'm trying to get at here is that it's sort of vague in terms of, it's vague in terms of what you have to do, right? So you have to take every reasonable precaution to protect the safety of your workers, absolutely. But then how employers go about doing that is up to them. So there's some good commentary. I just pulled like one key point here because we're talking about training. So it does talk about that we have to, identify and assess the hazards, implement controls. But this section in particular here says that when an employee has, and it gives specific numbers too, which is nice. When an employee is required to manually lift items weighing more than 10 kilograms, which would be roughly 22 pounds, then the employer shall instruct and train the employees in a method of lifting and carrying that's going to minimize stress on the body. And then also in a procedure appropriate to the employee's physical condition and the conditions of the workplace. So this is great. Like that kind of point is really the basis on how we structure our training, and really how we try to envision delivering our training as well, is that we're instructing it based on, how do you put minimal strain on the body, as well as taking into account the conditions of their workplace, where they work, that kind of thing. So again, as I mentioned today, I really am talking about training, but I mean, I would be gapping big time if I didn't at least mention the fact that, because I'm kind of going to skim over this and go right into training, which training is technically an administrative control. But first, I mean, if you've got manual material handling happening in your workplace, it is always a good idea to make sure that you're identifying and assessing hazards, right? So part of your process is identifying safety hazards, right? And within those safety hazards, maybe you're talking about ergonomics and manual material handling. You're also talking about your guarding and your slips, trips, and falls, and the long list of other safety hazards that you're addressing. But during that process, you should also be looking at these manual material handling hazards. If you're finding hazards, you're assessing it, determining what the level of risk is. In some cases, it's a quick little simple, a checklist, an agreement within your committee about what the level of risk is and how you're going to go about controlling it. And sometimes it is about doing a more in-depth or a formalized risk assessment process where you're running your Liberty Mutual tables, like comparing the task parameters to actual ergonomic standards and guidelines to kind of get a number, trying to quantify the risk. And then controlling them. So again, coming up with that plan that's going to eliminate or minimize or reduce the hazards, right? So that's where training comes into play, and then review and evaluate. So this is your typical cycle. So again, I'm not just saying just go out and do training. Definitely you want to make sure you're identifying and assessing the hazards, and then one of your controls possibly is going to be training. And so today I'm really just focusing on that one control solution. So I alluded earlier that I wanted to kind of break out, like it's probably the easiest to talk about lifting, just because when we think about manual material handling, most people generally think about lifting. But really, like there are standard lifts. When you think about how training is typically delivered, like it is this picture of this girl lifting this crate is very typical. I mean, maybe you're going to see a stick person or maybe somebody wearing coveralls or something, but any poster that you see, any diagram, any video, most of the time, the person is handling a box. Almost always they're holding a box. So that's what I would call more of a standard lift. You know, something that is balanced, something that is predictable, something where the worker can get right in front of it, right? So that they are, you know, there's not reaching, there's not twisting happening. That object is directly in front of them. It's a balanced load that they can get a comfortable, easy grip. Maybe it even has handles. And it's in that ideal height range. So they're not having to pick it up off the floor, or they're not having to reach and pick it off of a shoulder overhead or access it via a ladder, right? So a standard lift is kind of that predictable, easy to handle load. Then a non-standard lift would be everything else. So things that are really awkward shapes, whether it be big or small or just, you know, really awkward to get a handhold on. Something that has an uneven weight distribution, you know, like the other day we were just doing a practical example within our team, and we were using a leaf blower, a big, bulky leaf blower, not necessarily the ones that you see out in the workplace, but, you know, one of these old hand-me-down ones. And it's a very uneven weight distribution, right? One end is much heavier than the rest. It could be something that's really long. So a big post when you're installing a sign or in a lumber yard, bags, sacks, anything like that, like, you know, a bag of flour, a bag of chalk, a bag of salt, grain, chalk. I mean, all of those bags, they don't have handles. They're not necessarily small, and they're floppy, if that's a good word to describe them, but, you know, like the shape is not rigid. A non-standard lift would also include people. So in your healthcare environments, for example, when you're having to transfer or lift the clients or the patients, right? So again, people don't come with handles, and they're not evenly distributed in weight. And you kind of add in the extra unpredictable fact that they can move and they can wiggle and they can resist. So I would say that probably 9 times out of 10, the lifting that we do in the workplace, but in life in general, like our daily tasks, they probably fit more into this non-standard category. Right? But the thing with this is that we continually see and do and deliver training that is kind of related to the standard. So we continually see posters with people handling boxes, and we see the very the traditional language, right? Like if I asked you, well, what makes a good lifting technique, or what's best practice for lifting postures, I would say that most people could rhyme off several of the key things, right? Well, I should be lifting with my knees or lifting with my legs and not with my back. I should keep my back straight. I should make sure that I'm not twisting, right? I can pivot and turn my feet. You know, there's lots of things that people will rhyme off. Now, in actual practice, when you're lifting that really awkward or, you know, the long post, all of those safe lifting practices that we have been teaching or demoing with a box, you know, is it getting transferred the same way? Are people able to take those principles and apply them to that? Or are they kind of glazing over and rolling their eyes saying like, well, it's not a box, doesn't apply to me, right? So some of those standard safe lifting practices don't always transfer very well, and keep the load close to your body. Well, okay, it's a big bag of garbage though. I don't actually want to keep that close to my body because it could drip on me, or there could be something sharp in there and I actually am supposed to keep it away. So sometimes the non-standard loads can be somewhat contradictory to what we educate in these standard lifting diagrams and posters. So what I would suggest to you is to really evaluate your current state. So, whether you're having injuries or not, that's, well, I don't want to say that's besides the point, but it doesn't matter. Even if you're doing training, if you've got manual material handling, and when you're looking at doing training, then there are things that you want to look at. So have you done training in the past, or how are you doing it currently, right? Are you doing posters or safety talks or tailgate talks or whatever you call them? Are you doing classroom sessions? You're getting people all in a room and you're showing them a video. Are you having them read some online resources and then answer a quiz? Again, I'm not saying any of these are right or wrong. I'm just listing off some examples of ways that I know that people might do this type of training. But again, is it in a classroom? Is it, where is it? How often is it being done? Is it something that you do every year? Is it something that you do just, when an injury happens and you're like, oh crap, we better just educate everybody now so that another injury doesn't happen? Are you doing it when people get hired as part of the orientation and then maybe never again? Just all of those things, kind of sit there and kind of map out how it is that training, manual material handling training, is currently happening in your workplace. Okay, the next thing is it working? So are you seeing a lot of injuries? Are you identifying a ton of hazards? Are you hearing a lot of complaints? Are you hearing a lot of buzz? Are you seeing good lifting technique? Are you seeing people practice and practice in their job doing what you've been teaching, right? So is it working might mean several things. So is it working? A measurable would obviously be that we're seeing reduced injuries, but is it working would also be a great visual is let's say you're walking around on the plant floor. Are you seeing people using good techniques? That's a really good, you don't want to single out just one or two people, but in general, is the trend that people are actually lifting with good techniques? I think that would be a great measure on, a quick, what's the word? It's not a formalized process, but that would be a good indication to you if you're just doing a walkabout to see if it is working. Because chances are that it's probably not. And yet we continue to do the same thing. We show posters, we do safety talks, we show videos, and it's often the same message, lift with your legs, not with your back, and it's pictures of people holding boxes. And it's like that, what's the definition, this Albert Einstein one, it's that the definition of insanity is that you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Totally applies here, right? So you think you're going to reduce lifting related injuries or material handling related injuries, and yet you keep doing the same type of training. Great indication that it's time to kind of think outside the box and maybe try something new and try something different. And what's that going to look like? Great. So you need to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. So again, maybe you're thinking about doing training because you've just had an injury and you're doing it more of a reactive approach. Maybe it's because you just want to check off a box and make sure that everybody is getting the training that's needed. And there's a lot, the compliance aspect. Maybe you're looking at revising your whole training program, and you want to make sure you're oh, well, manual material handling, that's a good thing to include in there. How often should we do it? And maybe you're here just because you're literally trying to get some ideas on how you're going to incorporate it. So again, lots of different things that you could be trying to achieve. I think your ultimate goal, most people's goal anyways, should be that you're trying to reduce injuries, that you're trying to create a safer work environment. So again, don't forget that you're going to try to identify and assess the hazards and implement engineering controls, right? Trying to, implement a lift assist if it's needed or if it's practical, right? So I'm not saying that training is a control that will solve the problem. definitely I'm not. I'm just saying that when you are looking at doing training as a control, that you're really wanting to look at that goal and thinking about what tasks do your workers perform, right? So, excuse me, so there's a couple things going on right now. So like right now, when we do training, it's for a variety of reasons. So one of the common reasons right now, and this is kind of just because there's initiative going on, but with municipalities in Ontario right now, they're really doing a focus on ergonomics, and specifically, which will be coming up next year, is addressing public works. So municipalities are trying to get prepared, and they're doing exactly this, reviewing, well, what kind of training have we already done? If we get audited, what are we going to show them that we've done? And the reality is a lot of them don't necessarily have they don't have formal training on that. Maybe they have been doing training, but they can't necessarily show that everybody has gone through it or how regularly the staff are going through it. So right now we're doing a bunch of manual material handling training, and again, the reason for it right now is because there's a potential audit coming up, right? The Ministry of Labor is going to do inspections next year. However, it's something that they know that they need to do. It's just been moved to the forefront because of this initiative right now. The Ministry of Labor, though, will often write orders, and one of the more common orders, or is order the right word? I guess maybe recommendations that they make is related to ergonomics training, right? So they might say that you need to implement a program. They might say that you need to do a risk assessment or assess the hazards. And the other one is that you need to do MSD related awareness training, or if they're seeing a hazard that is specific to manual material handling, they are specifically saying that you should do training. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons why we might get involved in doing the training, but those are just, again, some kind of things to kind of describe, why people might have different motives in doing their training. But again, you want to think about that goal of your training to be on the very specific tasks that your frontline staff are doing, right? Think about those ideal work methods. So if they are using certain tools and equipment, should we be doing the training with a box, or should we be actually using their tools and equipment in their actual workplace? So all of these kind of considerations, like looking at your workers and the types of tasks they do, should all kind of give you some insight. So, I mean, that would almost be like my planning process would be to look at your workers and identify those that do manual material handling. And then, if you say, well, our office staff don't really do it, but our plant staff do. Okay, so we've got all our plant staff, and maybe it's divvied out. We've got production, we've got quality control, and kind of looking at those if there's different things that they have to handle. And do we want to do a training session that kind of covers off all of them, or are we going to kind of customize it for each of our different areas? Like the frontline staff could do it. You can also have staff who are out in the field as well, handling different things. The big thing, kind of like an outline for any training that I would do, would always be talking like with an intro about MSD hazards. So kind of like, what is ergonomics? And it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be long. It definitely doesn't need to be complex or technical, but it's just kind of talking about some of those hazards, and ultimately so that you're trying to get the point across is like, how does ergonomics apply to me? And trying to get them to buy in to what you're about to go through, right? So it's not just about, their work methods. So, I mean, you might want to show work methods that could impact injury risk in terms of make it riskier or more hazardous. And then part of your training would potentially be problem solving, or trying to provide solutions to them, or provide some ideas and strategies on how they might do it better, right? So I always like to focus in the training on ways to manage the hazards that are within their control. So that whole idea of work smarter, not harder, right? So, really you're trying to get across, how does ergonomics apply to me? How will it help me to do my job better, to do my job safer? And what is it about ergonomics that will help me? So I do suggest that you do try to do training sessions that are focused on the different types of frontline staff that you might have, and then customize it to their specific needs. Now, I know all industries are, varying sizes, the number of staff, all of that. So, I mean, you definitely need to kind of take it into consideration of what's going to work best for you. But I definitely think that customizing it to your different types of tasks is the way to go. Um, in terms of content, regardless of the session, I mean, I always kind of have a similar flow or outline, right? So I like to talk about some of those core principles up front and then use some specific examples. So, you start with talking about what is ergonomics, what are your MST hazards, and then kind of talking about some core principles. So again, I mean, I feel maybe I've kind of bashed those posters about, lift with your legs and not with your back and all these pictures of boxes. And I'm not saying that those concepts are wrong by any means, because those are still some of the core principles, right? It is true. Yes, you should try to keep the load close to your body. And yes, you shouldn't twist. You should try to avoid twisting, and you should pivot with your feet. And yes, you should lift with your legs and not with your back. But those would be the core principles. So it's fine, I think, still to review those concepts. And possibly even elaborate on those concepts a little bit too. Our team actually we attended a workshop, like a one-day kind of customized workshop for ourselves, because again, just always trying to improve upon our skills and kind of add to our repertoire. But we really wanted to learn more about safe movement. What is good movement? Yes, like lifting, these old principles, but if those aren't working, like, is there another strategy? Are there other ways that you can get those principles across? And so, and for them, they talked a lot about, like, for in the session, that we went to, these core principles are a lot more focusing on like the back, the shoulder, and the knees. So they kind of break it down into the 3 areas. And so, those old familiar sayings and posters that you've seen, they do still sort of fit in there, but the way that they were suggesting is that you're thinking more, not necessarily about picturing yourself holding the box, but what is it that you're trying to achieve? So you're trying to keep your spine straight. Well, does that mean that you have to do a squat position? And you want to make sure that you keep the load close to you and that you get as close as you can. Well, that looks different for several different people, right? When you talk about, how do you keep your knees in the best posture, it's about keeping your knees in line with your toes, but that on each different body, that might look a little different. So again, I'm not saying that to not address those core principles. I still think that they're very practical, and you might be able to even kind of add on to them to talk more about, back, shoulder, knee. Kind of you can hone in on, what does good posture look like for each of those main joints or main areas. And the thing that I think that really would set apart kind of an average Joe type of training session for material handling to a really good one is having those specific examples, right? You could do it in a classroom setting, or you could go out in the field and you could have them practice with the stuff that they actually use. Make them take those core principles that you talked about. Sure, we talked about, how you can try to keep it close to you, try to keep a secure grip, try to keep it balanced. Now let's go out and practice it on the stuff that you actually use and see if you can do it. And yeah, I get it. You handle that stuff every day, but let's now, like, in this kind of controlled environment, let's think about those principles and make sure that we're actually applying them in our day-to-day practice, right? So there's lots of different kind of styles that you might deliver this, and kind of, we've done a variety of different versions. My favorite is always hands-on in the field or on the line, like right in their workplace. And then sometimes we've had to do some of that theory component, maybe via like a video module or a classroom session, and then we kind of move to the area. So it kind of just depends on, the number of topics that we're covering, or what we have available in the time. But 100% my favorite is doing it like in the field with them, like in their environment with their own stuff. So in terms of what is the best way to deliver it, well, the best way might be a little bit different for each of you, but I mean, those are the things that I think that you would want to consider, is trying to make it hands-on, trying to make it practical, trying to make it relevant, right? Like, that's the big thing, is that we don't handle a box. So you don't want them to go into training and sure, now you've checked off the box that you delivered the training, but then if nobody's using it, nobody's actually practicing it, then it's kind of a waste of time, right? So we've done a couple of workshops in the past too, just where we've had it was like a workshop where we had like a big group discussion about how would we address delivering training, considering we have maybe we have 20 workers, maybe we have 200 workers, or maybe we have more, and they all work in different locations. And what are some of the best ways that you might go about doing that? We did talk about maybe you could do it as like a train the trainer method, or one-on-one. Sure, one-on-one would be great. If you had a small group, you could really do a nice customized personal transfer of content, but one-on-one training is really not practical for most workplaces. Train the trainer, it definitely could work as long as you have got a good group of trainers. I would say the number one thing people say is like, oh, like the supervisors or the lead hands could do it. And it's like, yeah, you know what, they could. They probably could. They probably have a lot of other things on their plate too. So, if that's a solution for your workplace, great. But that may not be a realistic solution for every workplace. So again, just kind of think about how, like, who's going to deliver the training in terms of, the best way to deliver it. I know we've done several quotes where we've said we're going to do train the trainer, and the clients will come back and say, you know what, like, train the trainer, I get that would be a good way to kind of make this element sustainable in our overall program. However, we truly believe that, by bringing in an expert, maybe it's going to cost us a bit more money, but that maybe our staff will listen more, or maybe they'll take more away from it. And again, because it's sort of different than what we've done in the past. So, I mean, we've seen the whole variety. We've done train the trainer, and we've done that direct training, and it totally just kind of depends on the client, the workplace, and the size really, and what's going to be most practical and work for you. So the other thing that you'd want to think about is the actual delivery of it, right? Again, like, is it going to be in small group sessions? Like, how will you actually go about disseminating this information, delivering the training, right? Are you going to do it in small groups? We've seen lifting training happen in a whole variety of ways. And it doesn't have to be a full day training or a half day training. It could be short little 10-minute blips that happen. If you're doing really specific stuff, you could do a really short little safety talk with a crew, specifically about handling signs. You could do a really short one on that. And then you could have like another topic where you specifically talk about shoveling tasks, right? And like pothole patching, for example. So you could do really short ones. There's no reason to say that you couldn't, or you could do a longer session. Maybe you're going to do a 1 or a 2 hour session, and you're going to talk about kind of that theory stuff, and you're going to like the main hazards, and you're going to talk about the core principles, and then you're going to get them to work through some examples, some specific examples related to the tasks that they do. Right, so it could be more of that workshop style. You could do it as part of a wellness day even. Like, there could be maybe you have like a station set up where people come by and they address it. Manual material handling could be a part of your orientation. It could be part of an annual education day or annual education series that you might have. I know that everybody kind of has different training matrices and how they training matrices, sorry, that was a tough word, and kind of how they go about documenting training and the frequency. So lots of ideas on kind of that format or how you might actually deliver it. But again, always important to try to make it hands-on and practical. I think manual material handling, for sure, it's got to be to make it the most effective. And so for that reason, also, you're going to want to consider the location. Can you mock it up in a certain spot, or can you do it out in the field? Maybe it's not practical to do it in the field because you want to do training in January, and so you don't want to have your crew out there in the -30 weather trying to do training, and so maybe you're able to kind of mock it up in the garage instead, right? So bring some of the tools there. But again, not sacrificing the examples or the content, but just being mindful of the environment, right? That you want to have it out in the field, but also have people engaged and not freezing. In terms of, okay, so you've got standard and non-standard, right? So the standard lift, it's like you can go through the core principles, you can talk about all of the best ways that you might lift something, and then you've got the non-standard lifts. Like you can think about all the rebuttals basically that you're going to have. Well, the stuff that I load and load off my truck, that doesn't look like that. It's not a box. Or I work in a ditch, like it's not flat ground, or I'm on a hill. Like how am I supposed to keep it close to me or keep it balanced, or, work with this great posture? Like I'm already standing on an incline. Or again, the garbage example, I can't keep it close to my body. I don't know what's in the bag. I need to keep it a certain distance away from my body. It could be dripping. So the thing that I always like to kind of have in my back pocket is that I want them to kind of think about, well, how would you do it? Sure, you've got to lift something that is not easy, or that it's not quote unquote standard. So what is it that you're going to do, right? And the answer is that the solution may not necessarily be the same for everybody, but we're trying to get them to think about their body alignment. You're trying to get them to think more about their posture. When, like 9 times out of 10, if you go to lift something that is heavy, and I don't know, like let's say you're going to go to lift something that's 50 pounds, 60 pounds, chances are you're going to sit there and you're going to think about the lift. Maybe you're not going to sit there for a minute and think about it, but you're going to think about it that, oh, like I should really make sure to not, stoop over when I pick this up. Like I should think about getting a good grip and, keeping my abs tight, or, whatever the ones that you're feeling that are important in that moment. But when something is light, like let's say 10 pounds or less, we often don't plan for it in the same way. And so just because something is heavy, like 50 or 60 pounds, it doesn't necessarily mean that those are the items that we're seeing workers get hurt on the most. A lot of times you find that people will get hurt on the things that are light, like, oh, I can't believe that, that's how I hurt my back. Like it just bent over to pick up a piece of paper. Well, it wasn't necessarily just, the paper or that small box that, made you hurt your back. It's probably that cumulative effect of doing things with not great posture, right? And it can really build up. So in terms of, when I'm delivering training, or our team, something that we always talk about is that we're trying to talk about, well, the work methods that could increase risk. So reaching. So for example, this picture here of the guy with his truck loaded with all of these items, he could stand right there and he could reach forward and he could grab a box, right? And if he lifted it up, he would be, if you can vision this, he's probably going to be bent over at the waist, probably not with his knees bent, because he's probably leaning on the back of the truck. He's going to have his arms stretched out in front of him. And then you would want to, like, if this was me coaching this guy or doing training with this guy, I would say, okay, well, what could you do that would improve this task? And, and see what he says, see what your workers say. If for this case, like, slide the boxes closer, right? So before you actually lift it, he still could reach in there and slide things closer. That would be one way of improving the posture. So instead of lifting it far away from his body, he's sliding it closer to him. And possibly it's kind of cut off in this picture, but it looks like there's a step on the back of the truck. And so that would be another thing, is that he steps up into the truck and gets right in nice and close. And again, in this example, they are boxes, so he could get nice and close and lift up the box, right? So again, it's about thinking about those practical strategies and kind of getting your workers to actually think about them and brainstorm and problem solve through them, right? Not allowing them to say, well, we can't do it because we don't lift boxes all day, or, letting them kind of come up with all of these resisting factors. Is that you kind of want to have some strategies in your back pocket about how you're going to manage that, but not necessarily telling them what it is that they're going to do, but helping facilitate them working through some of those challenges. Something else to keep in mind, and I think, like, I've probably alluded to this a couple of times, but there are multiple solutions. This is not like manual material handling training or how you lift an item or how how you handle an item. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution, right? All of us are, different heights, different shapes, different hand sizes, kind of the alignment of our hips, even the way that your hips are angled can affect your knees, so that when you bend down, looking across these pictures here, all of these would be considered acceptable and good lifting techniques, but they're all quite different strategies. So, if I flip back, this worker here, if he gets up into his truck, effectively he could choose any one of these lifting strategies and they all could be fine. Maybe he really likes, this kind of deadlift type of look, right? The guy on the far left here. But maybe his coworker, that's not comfortable for him. He just doesn't have the range of motion. Maybe he's a bit more of that beer belly shape. Maybe he is more likely to do the bend down and squat on the knees and do a lift like that. And then maybe the next coworker really doesn't have great knees and tends to flare their toes out a little bit more, and that helps them to get down nice and low to pick up something from the ground, right? So there are lots of different strategies. The range of motion that each of us has in our hips or in our knees and in our shoulders is all a little bit different. And, that could be from previous injuries, it could be from age, it could be, from a lack of strength potentially. But all of those things are going to impact how a lift or movement occurs. And so that's what I suggest that I challenge you to think about when you are incorporating or trying to improve or add some zip, I guess, to your manual material handling training, is to think about that and to talk about the different solutions and let people know that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. It doesn't have to look exactly like this poster, but it's about thinking about your posture and what works for you. So keeping your back in alignment, keeping a straight spine, and working through some examples of having them feel, what does a straight spine feel like? And you could have them practice picking up a really light box. And then your next example is, okay, now let's try to apply that when we have to pick up our leaf blower, or we've got to grab our toolbox from the back of the truck. Right, so there's just some ways that you might be able to kind of approach the manual material handling to make it more interesting, to make it more specific and practical. I just put together this list of just kind of things to remember, right? So this does sort of come back to that identify and assess aspect as well. So, thinking about a task or an object that's handled regularly is, what is the weight? What's the force required? Can we reduce the force, right? So, can we lift a smaller amount? Can we push it instead of carrying it, right? So is there equipment to make it easier? How can I handle it to reduce the impact on my body? For that same task, on the one side of things, you're kind of thinking about what tools and equipment, how can I change the item, what can I use to help me? And then for that same task, you definitely don't want to forget about thinking about your posture as well. And they go hand in hand. So can I perform the task with that neutral spine, right? Without having a rounded spine, without twisting? Can I keep my shoulder at a 90 degrees or less angle? Can I keep my knees, hips, and feet in alignment, right? And then also kind of thinking, like, is there equipment available that would help me maintain better posture? So they go hand in hand. And so I guess that kind of comes back full circle really to the beginning of the webinar when I was saying, well, when you're looking at, let's say you're investigating an injury or something that's happened and you're trying to put in your corrective measures, just putting in worker needs to review training isn't necessarily like the most effective solution. I do think it's hand in hand. So sure, training would probably help, but should we also maybe revisit that task and see if there's anything else that we could do that might then help the person use better posture, right? So it's very much a cyclical or a chicken and the egg cycle type of question. So, I'm all for training. I just, training on its own as like the only solution, I don't think is always the right answer. I always want to make sure that you're kind of looking at the big picture. But for sure, if you're looking at your training and really trying to make it practical and thinking about what's going to engage your workers, and then, then you ask that question, well, is it effective? And, you know, if you walked around the plant and your plant floor and you saw workers who are actually doing really good technique and good posture, like, that'd be such a good feeling. Is it working? Yeah, it is. Because, you know, you implemented this, you know, a fresh new training idea. So anyways, I've been talking a lot. The webinar is almost over here, but I wanted to recap here. So yes, I know I'm talking a lot. I'm very passionate about this type of training, especially because we've been doing a lot of it recently, and just we're trying to make it different and engaging, right? It forces us to learn a lot more too. As the trainer, we are learning a lot more about, you know, what makes a good lift, and, you know, what are some of the challenges of delivering that kind of plain old content. You know, we want to make it engaging, and it gets engaging for the workers, but it also makes the training more exciting to us as the training deliverers, to be able to have something that's more workshop based. You know, it's kind of inspiring a newfound passion for training, kind of a topic that we've been doing a long time. So it's adding some zest into, you know, something that could be considered dry. But anyway, so recap summary. So what's your goal? So thinking about your outcome here, thinking about your content and how you might deliver it. So that overview, that background, coming up with some specific and practical examples. So thinking about how you might be breaking it out into the different groups or sections of your frontline staff, based on who does manual material handling. And definitely consider the setting and the format. You really want to maximize engagement. So look at what you've currently been doing, and is it working? And if you're wanting to, you know, if you think everything's working fine and dandy, then great. But if you're looking to kind of inject some enthusiasm or, you know, a breath of freshness into this training, really think about maybe changing the setting, changing the examples, changing up the format, and you might find that a little bit more invigorating. Fun for yourself as the one who's kind of coordinating or delivering the training, but also more fun for the staff who likely go through, you know, lots and lots of training, and, you know, this would be something that kind of stands out to them, right? Makes them remember it more too. So I'm at the end here. So any questions? Now is the time to use that chat bar. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, sorry, you can always use that chat bar to ask questions or comments throughout at any time. I usually kind of look over at certain times, but I make sure to save all the questions to the end, because then I don't get distracted in the middle. So while you guys type, I'll leave this up here. So, I mean, you can ask questions now. You can always send us an email with questions or give us a call at any point, whether it just be that you're watching the recording later or you think of something after the fact. By all means, reach out to us. And while people are typing away some questions, I will just let you know about next month's webinar, the last one of 2018. Can you even believe that? So this one's going to be talking about adjustability on the line. So totally a different topic. Like in the last couple of months, we've talked about like ergonomics in the field, like for tablet and laptop users. This month we're talking about manual material handling. Next month we're going to talk about adjustability in terms of like working heights. So lots and lots of good ergonomic stuff, some diversity. So let me figure out how to open up these questions. Here we go. Okay, so give me 1 second to just read this question. Okay, so let me read the question out loud so that you guys can all hear it. So, so in Mexico, the national regulation regarding ergonomics is in draft. There are bad practices on handling of manual loads. Therefore, what do you think about the use of an elastic band to minimize the risk of musculoskeletal injuries? For example, a back belt, a back support, or a belt that employees would wear. Right. So what do we think about that? Great question. Personally, professionally, myself and my team, we do not advocate or support back belts. in terms of a, like not as, I wouldn't say that it's a form of PPE that it's going to prevent injuries. Lots of different reasons on that. But again, I do think that, you could do, potentially you could do more harm than good by supporting the use of back belts. I know this is somewhat controversial, and but sometimes it can give people a false sense of confidence. So with a back belt on, the pro to that is that, okay, maybe I'm thinking about my posture more. I'm thinking about keeping my back straight because I have this physical belt on that I feel that's making me think about it. On the flip side, it could potentially give people a false sense of confidence, thinking that they're stronger or more capable than they are, and they may choose to try to lift or move something that's heavier than they should, thinking that the back belt is going to help protect them. So as a measure, I personally or professionally would not recommend it, and that's the same with my team. But I do know that people use them in terms of it going into like a national standard or something like that. I would hope that it wouldn't specifically support the use of those. Okay, let me just check if there's any other questions. Okay, I can see that somebody is typing, so maybe I'll just wait a second while that comes in. But by all means, no need to hang on the line. If you don't have a question, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you next month or hope you'll join us for next month's webinar in December. And by all means, reach out to us if you do have any questions. I will hang on the line here just for another few minutes to see if any other questions pop in. But again, have a great day, and thanks so much for joining us.